Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk I was going to cover symbolism of Mercury or Budha as it's known in Sanskrit, and this is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective. So let's dive in. A note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. The other thing is that I'm actually collecting my Jyotish Vedic astrology teaching videos. I have I do monthly transit videos, but I'm also starting to build a collection of teaching videos, and they're all in my concepts playlist. So if you're interested in that, check that playlist out. And as I go through this video, you'll occasionally see a double asterisk. And what that means is that I actually have a teaching video on that concept. So you can, if you're like, oh, you know, what's planetary war? And you see a double asterisk, you can go and check out that video. Alrighty? So back to Mercury. Budha. So Mercury day is Wednesday. And Mercury is strong in the following positions when it's in its own house, a house that it owns or rules. And that's either Gemini or Mithuna or Virgo or Kanya. Those two constellations are what Mercury owns. Mercury is in the exalted or Ucha position in Virgo, Kanya. That's the only planet that's actually exalted in its own house, which is kind of interesting. It's strong whenever it's Swa, it's in its own house. It's also strong when it's retrograde or Vakri. It does have directional strength or Digbala, which is in the first house. So when you see Mercury in the first house or bhava of a chart, it's considered strong, as the first house is considered to sort of represent east or about 6 o'clock in the morning. So kind of the time of sunrise. And you can see like exalted, I've got a double asterisk. Digbal, I've got a double asterisk. So we've got teaching videos on that if you're not familiar with those concepts. Oh, and as we go through this as well, all these photos that I've included in here actually represent Mercury in different ways. So once I go through the talk, you can go through and look at the pictures and wonder, why did she choose this one? How does this represent Mercury? So you can kind of review and be a little bit more active in your learning. I think that helps generally most people. Okay, so Mercury, weakness positions. It is weak when it's debilitated, and it happens to be debilitated in Pisces or Mina. It's also debilitated when it's combust or Asta. Combustion is when it's within a few degrees of the sun. Basically, the sun is so bright it eclipses the planet. Mercury can also be weak when it's a planetary war loser. And planetary war is when two true planets are within 1 degree of each other. And again, you see the asterisks here, so there's more teaching videos on these things. And Mercury is also weak when it's in Sandhi, which means that it's in the first or last degree of any sign. Mercury has relationships with other planets. It's friends with Sun and Venus. It is neutral with Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, and its enemy is the Moon. So qualities of Mercury. Mercury rules the rational mind, speech, worldly knowledge, and its kind of characteristics are it's volatile, it's versatile, it's adaptable. It happens to represent the earth element. In Ayurveda, Mercury is considered to be a tridoshic planet, so it actually includes Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. It's the only planet that is tridoshic. It's Guna, it's a Rajasic planet, so Rajasic means that it's active, and it tends to have kind of, it's a very goal-oriented type of planet. It has that kind of energy, more than saying being spiritual or more than being inactive. If we were to assign kind of a gender type energy to this planet, it's considered neuter, or it's considered both masculine and feminine, so you can use either one. And Mercury is generally considered to be a natural benefic planet unless it's with other natural malefics. So that's unique about Mercury. Is that Mercury, depending on which other planets it associates with, can kind of swing in terms of its natural beneficness or malefic qualities. So more personification of Mercury here. So Mercury is considered to be the prince, the heir apparent to the throne, whereas Sun is king and Moon is queen. So you already kind of get, like, the prince tends to be, I think it could be a princess too, but classically it's taught as a prince. The prince or princess, they're youthful, they're younger. I guess it depends on how old the king or queen is, potentially, but so there's this idea of not entirely mature or not yet entirely in their full power or empowerment. Mercury can represent aunts and uncles, business associates, acquaintances, kind of the rational, analytical, intelligent type of mind. Mercury kind of ruled or dominated people tend to be very detail oriented. As a caste, traditionally Mercury is considered to be a Vaishya class or caste, which means trade or business. And again, by caste, we're not talking about one caste being better than another. It really is more, classically, it's more of just a way of kind of grouping people based on the way that their mind tends to function and the sort of focus that they tend to have and the values that they tend to have. So Mercurial people tend to be very interested in business and trades. Mercury is very versatile, it's flexible, it can be flighty if it's not grounded. It can be distant, and by that, it's different than like a Saturn type of distant. Saturn is like just, sort of the isolated hermit, up on the hill who doesn't want to be disturbed anymore. Mercury can be distant because people who are very mercurial, if they don't have other strong planets, more emotional type planets, tend to be kind of cerebral or in their head, and they may come across as brainiacs, but you may not feel a lot of warmth from them because they are in their head analyzing things typically. Their persuasion method is through diplomacy, so they are tactful generally. If Mercury's related to the Lagna, which is the first house of the chart, people can tend on the shorter side in terms of height. And mercurial type of clothes tend to be very immaculate and clean. So again, this gets at the sort of detail-orientedness and the order and that sort of thing, organizing and order, and those are all sort of mercurial traits. And if Mercury, for example, is related to the partnership house or the seventh house, that can indicate that there's likely to be a partner, that it's an artisan. So there you go. More about Mercury. So mercurial psychology. So on the plus side, you can have somebody, if they have a strong Mercury, who's very rational, intelligent, witty, clever, skillful, cerebral, dexterous, this sort of thing, has a lot of high level of verbal and mental ability. They can be shrewd. On the negative side, you can get this more kind of aloofness or detachment because, again, they're in their head too much. Potentially amorality, because again, if you're in your head enough and you're sort of detached from your feeling side or your conscience side, which, people can tend to rationalize their behavior and not necessarily in a way that's helpful or beneficial for others. So, they can be expedient, they can be overly intellectual, they can have difficulty in thought or communication if Mercury is afflicted somehow. And again, they can just be sort of a talking head with a lot of knowledge and numbers and stuff like that, but they may have a hard time connecting with people on an emotional basis. So professions related to Mercury, poetry, speaking, studying, learning, teaching. You can see this is all mentally challenging sometimes, or at least requires more mental work than physical work. Last time I covered Mars, and Mars tends to be more of a physical working type person. So scholars, education, things related to education, writing, editing, publishing. So again, you can see this, mental work here. Anything requiring a wit, translators, working between two languages, because we're not only talking about speech, but, the mental ability to, toggle between two different languages. Researchers, because they're always digging for information, organizing information, writing about writing about information, and all that. Astrology, actually. So, if you're interested in astrology, as you might probably are watching this, you may have a fairly strong Mercury in your chart. Sacred knowledge, repetition of mantras. And the reason being here, I think, is because, this sort of sacred knowledge, like astrology and repetition of mantras and stuff like that, it's high-minded activities typically, but also I would say most of it, not always. I mean, if you live in like a communal setting or something like that and you're always around people, maybe, but I tend to think that these sorts of activities for the most part are kind of in isolation, done in isolation. I know when I'm looking at charts and stuff like that, I'm in just my own little bubble, looking at charts, trying to not be distracted, turn off my phone or all that kind of stuff, so I can just focus on the chart and making all the connections. So that may be why these things are here. Clerical work, again, organizing, all the details, that sort of work that's needed in that kind of work. Analysis, so analyzing numbers and thoughts. The use of numbers, mathematics, information generally, computers, internet. Again, these are all very, much things of the mind. Artisans, manual dexterity. So this is a different aspect. Now we're talking about a different aspect of Mercury, which is more the use of hands and arms and coordination. Because as we'll see when we talk about medical stuff, Mercury represents hands and arms and coordination. Manual dexterity, hand-eye coordination. And then there's this sort of category of sales, broker, commerce, entrepreneur. Because again, when you're selling something or you're brokering something or you're in commerce, or if you're an entrepreneur, generally, you have to be connecting with some kind of customer, communicating with them somehow, introducing them to your product or service, tabulating all the sales data. There's a lot of, running a business requires a lot of mercurial types of skills. Humor and comedian. So mercurial, to be witty and funny, you have to have a certain dexterity of mind to, crack a joke and get people to laugh. So they can be entertaining that way. Announcers, people in the news, because again, all that information, communicating that information to the public, that's all Mercury. Architects, because you're designing buildings. Photographers, this one I'm not exactly sure how to explain, except that, again, I don't know, at least when I do my photography, I'm usually on my own, in my own little bubble again, trying to take in the world and capture it in certain ways. As a person, youth is on this list. The reason why, any kind of profession related to youth. So like if you were working at a YMCA or something like that, or some sort of youth group leader or something like that, Mercury's probably involved. Priests, again, this is probably sort of related to astrology and sacred knowledge and stuff, is that, when you're commuting with the divine or something sacred, you're really trying to focus on it. Although, you can also take the approach that everything is divine. So, but I think, when people go into meditation and isolation, or isolation to meditate, that's kind of Mercury coming about. And I tend to see when people have strong Mercuries, like they could be an entrepreneur, they can also, they tend to be drawn towards Buddhism, because I think Buddhism tends to be a very cerebral type of the spiritual lineage. My impression of it, I'm not too deep into it, but from what I see from other people and the general philosophy, it seems very mercurial. Also things like fraud and plagiarism. And why would this be? So this is kind of more if Mercury is afflicted by negative planets or malefic planets, because all this mental dexterity and cleverness and all this can be used in negative ways. So fraud and plagiarism, in a way, is kind of, passing things off as true or your own. It's kind of a mental theft. You had to be pretty clever to find the resources and come up with the fake dollar bill or whatever it is. That takes a lot of intelligence, especially if you don't get caught. But again, it's sort of the sort of more negative potential side of Mercury if all these mercurial qualities are used for more negative purposes. So maladies, medical stuff related to Mercury. I mentioned arms and hands are Mercury. Other body parts: skin, lungs, the tongue, thyroid, hips, peripheral nerves. So things like faulty reasoning and memory are also related to Mercury, because again, the more rational and analytical cognitive function that Mercury represents. The brain itself and the spinal cord are actually related to the sun. So make a note of that. Speech disorder, because again, communication, coordination, because again, arms, hands, peripheral nerves. Sense of smell, I can't exactly explain that one. But a general sense of perception, especially through touch, that's a mercurial thing. Hearing, nervous habits, things like tremors and tics, that can be signs that Mercury is afflicted somehow. From an Ayurvedic perspective, we would say the Majadhatu, which loosely translates as nervous system in Ayurveda, is mercurial. And the respiratory system, as I mentioned, the lungs. So those are different things. If Mercury is well placed and well conditioned, or poorly placed or poorly conditioned, these are the sorts of things that will either be well formed and well functioning or not. And then mercurial places, so places of business, transportation, communication. So again, movement, because Mercury is moving, shaking, mover and shaker type of planet. Airports, post offices, because again, we have communication, organizing, delivering, a lot of mercurial energy. Accounting offices, right, organizing all those numbers. Non-violent games and sports, because to typically be good at a game or sport, if it's not heavy, like entirely physical, it's all about the mental game. So that's important. Things like stadiums where these sports are taking place, entertainment places like theaters, parks, playgrounds, because again, these places are not only sort of, for entertainment purposes, but they're also places where you can like meet the public and meet strangers, because you're all in a public place. Bookstores, libraries, again, this is more the sort of cerebral, educational aspect of Mercury. Meeting places generally, intersections, like I don't see that listed very much, but any place that you have intersections of streets or roads or trains, or where people come and go, like Grand Central Station is very much a mercurial place. Places of public assembly, places like the United Nations, because you have people from all over the world. You have to work well in that type of setting. You have to know, I don't know how many languages, and the culture, not just the language, but the cultures, and you have to be diplomatic. So a lot of that is very mercurial. Human habitats, because again, Mercury and Jupiter as well are planets that tend to represent human animals. So, and also, if there's a building, it tends to be, and it's mercurial in nature, it will tend to be artistic, because again, that kind of thoughtful, and mindful design of a building is mercurial in nature. So mercurial flowers, foods, trees, and animals. So leaves and mung beans, fruitless trees. So we're talking more the green parts of plants tend to be mercurial. Small plants, wildflowers, roots of all kinds, and products made from those roots, like root beer, carrots, bananas, parsnips, okra. Fruits and vegetables that are long. That's a little bit funny to me, but that's what it is. And also things like nectarines, which is a type of hybridized fruit. So hybridized fruits and vegetables is on this list. And again, hybridization is, it's not a naturally occurring phenomenon. You have to mentally think, okay, how can I make, this, pink fruit in my head that I'm imagining, and you graph the one tree to the other tree or whatever. So it's very much a man-made and mental exercise to create something like that. Things that have mixed or varied flavors. So in my mind, I'm thinking curry, some sort of like Indian curry. And also birds. So Saturn and Mercury represent birds. And as I mentioned, Mercury and Jupiter represent humans. So those are things that Mercury represents. Time and distant aspects of Mercury. So maturation of the planet, it happens in about 32 years. Once you're pretty well out of youth. Although some people, like the Peter Pan syndrome, some of those people have either strong Mercury or, I don't know, maybe related to positive planets, if they're just like eternally optimistic or something. Maybe negatively if they're people who just don't want to grow up and take responsibility. So, it can go either way. Personified, this is a youth or, up to an adolescent type of person. The duration of things that are mercurial tend to be, not too long lasting, 5 to 14 years. The season represented by Mercury is Sharad, which is the 20th September to 19th of October, so kind of early fall. And the length, if there is a length related to Mercury, it's 8 yojanas, and a yojana is about, 4 to 8 miles, so 8 yojanas is about 32 to 64 miles. Other things related to Mercury: shape, color, gemstone. So a triangle is mercurial, that three-sidedness that tends to be balanced but also dynamic. In terms of a shape, the color green is mercurial. The metal brass is considered Mercury, represents Mercury. Emerald is the big gemstone for Mercury, that nice bright green stone. Also peridot and green tourmaline are alternatives to emerald. And I always put here, I don't tend to use gemstones in planetary remedies and things like that. I was advised by my instructors, my teachers in Jyotish, not to use them because they can potentially go wrong in terms of amplifying negative effects of planets. So, I don't have that information. I was advised not to use them, but if that's your thing, I would definitely make sure you find somebody who truly knows what they're doing if you're going to use gemstones or crystals and stuff to balance planetary energy. So that's it for Mercury. As always, thank you for your time. I hope you found this interesting and helpful in your learning journey of Jyotish. If you're interested, I have another YouTube channel called Nature Source Care, in which I discuss other Vedic arts like Ayurveda and yoga, as well as additional natural therapies such as homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. So there you go. Enjoy Mercury. I'm sure Mercury's enjoying you. And until the next one, take care. Namaste.